Hey there and welcome back to another Rise of the Guardians video. And today, once again, I want to mourn the fact that the first Rise of the Guardians film was relatively unsuccessful at the box office. Because, once again, I was trolling on the wiki, reading up on the extended lore of the universe, and I got very sad that we are not going to see this stuff on screen anytime soon, if ever. Why did the film have to flop? Why did it have to make a loss for the studio? Why isn't life fair? Anyway though, like I said, I was reading through a lot of these old character wikis and I found heaps of them to be really interesting and intriguing. And the last time I made one of these videos, I made myself sad reading through the backstory that was outlined in the books for Nick St. North, aka Santa. Basically, he's set up to be this badass ruffian outlaw who over time morphs into the character we know from the films, who lives his life bringing joy and seeing the wonder in everything on Earth. A man who wants to share that wonder with all the children, whilst also still being a badass swashbuckler wielding guns and swords and whooping Pitch Black's ass every day of the week. And then the video before that, I talked at length about Pitch Black's own backstory and how that was also quite the interesting tale. How he was originally a hero with his own family, and how he was a great warrior who strived to protect the universe and preserve the Golden Age. How eventually, because he was just oozing with awesome, his enemies decided to kill his family instead, leaving him sad and alone, and how, after volunteering to guard the monsters he'd captured for all time, he gets corrupted into the villainous character Pitch Black the Nightmare King that we see in the books and movie. And this is yet another one of these really awesome backstories that will seemingly never see the light of day. Both of their stories, their origins, would have made such good Netflix series or something along those lines. But instead, we have to settle for these excellent stories languishing in obscurity forever, never getting the attention they deserve, or an adaptation that can really do them justice and make them shine to a whole new generation and audience. And since we're trying to keep it chronological with these videos as much as we can, next up we have the story of E.Aster Bunnymund, aka the Easter Bunny, and how he could have been just so much more. Just like Pitch, and just like North. So much more. And so first we'll talk about the movie. And next to Jack and Nick, I would argue that Bunny is probably the most important Guardian from a narrative perspective. And what I mean by that is that in terms of his role in the story, he holds one of the most important spaces for the protagonists. Jack is clearly positioned as the main hero. He's the movie's major focus, and thus he gets the most available characterization. We see his past, and his hopes, and his dreams. And ultimately, the film is his journey. And the next most important Guardian would then be Nick, because for the most part, he is the mentor type character. The character that Jack turns to when he doesn't understand what it means to be the Guardian. Who tells him about his center and gives him that classic pep talk. But already, we can see that he had pretty shallow development. He doesn't really change at all from start to finish, despite the huge journey this film takes the characters on. But what he does get is a lot of personality. And you know simply from a couple of scenes what this character is all about. But you can't really say the same about the Easter Bunny, despite his quite important role. After all, he's just the devil's advocate type character. He's still on the side of the heroes in general, but he doesn't like the protagonist, and the majority of his time on screen is butting heads with the various different Guardians, and especially with Jack Frost, whom he seems to hate with a passion due to a blizzard that occurred around 50 years before the events of the film. But ultimately, it is because of his position in the film that he's underdeveloped, that you can't really learn much about him other than he's a quite angry, rabbit, kangaroo-y kind of thing. He doesn't really have much of a personality or a backstory because most of his time on screen needs to be devoted to him being upset or unreasonable to create a sense of drama within the team, because there needs to be that tension. You see it all the time in team-up stories. I mean, literally every single Avengers film has this dynamic appear in one way or another. It works, and it's a useful tool for the screenwriters, so they don't have to keep having the heroes and villains clash to create the tension the film needs. But like I said, because the film needs that tension, it kind of had to sacrifice his character a little bit. I mean, we learn that he's Australian for some reason, and that despite being Australian and living underneath Australia, he considers Easter to be about spring, even though Easter in Australia is in autumn or fall for my American friends, and every time he says it on screen, I can't help but feel like he's betraying his country a little bit, but that's okay. That's my issue. I get it. But regardless, That is just his whole character in the film. Ha ha, g'day mate, boomerang, bit of a Brumby are you? Whoa, I'm such a bloody Aussie mate, whoa! But anyway, being a stereotype and being angry is not a personality. It's not a backstory. It's pretty two-dimensional. And I would argue that he's probably the most disappointing character in terms of characterization relative to the amount of screen time and importance he gets in the story. He doesn't develop at all. Hell, the movie is literally based around Easter and has the loss of Easter eggs as one of the driving conflicts of the film, which builds up to that final battle against Pitch Black and the restoration of the children's belief in the Guardians. And yet he can't even get a look in past Jack and North, and to an extent, the Tooth Fairy as well. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to bash the film. I freaking love the film, love it to death. But I'm not going to be some blind fanboy and pretend like it doesn't have any problems. Those kinds of people aren't very helpful at improving anything about anything, and honestly, they hinder discussion and progress. But on the bright side, the fact that he was underdeveloped in the film made any potential content with him in the main role a lot more exciting in the future. I feel like people do enjoy seeing their favourites, of course, but they also want to learn more about characters that didn't get that spotlight, like the Easter Bunny. And so, sequels or prequels of him probably would have been among the more hotly anticipated of this type of content. But of course, those are sequels and prequels that we won't get to see. Films and shows that will never be released. Lost to the land of what if. And since I'm a glutton for punishment, and I like to be sad thinking about how good things could have been if the franchise had been given a chance to continue, we'll continue where we left off from the end of North's story, where this time we get to see the first chronological appearance of the Easter Bunny. And obviously, read the book if you can, should support the author. I'll just be giving a slightly abridged version here for a bit of a taste. So, our first encounter with the Easter Bunny, or E.Aster Bunnymund, is in a time travel sequence where the wizard Omric uses a magic clock to go back in time and prevent Pitch Black from attacking the moon. But Bunny, wearing a crazy robe and wielding a big old staff with a jeweled egg on top of it, tells him he's a very naughty boy and sends him back to the present. So already, we're diving back into that crazy cosmic goodness that's really been present in the novels up to this point, but that the film never got a chance to explore in depth. And on top of that, we can see that the character of Bunny is very different too. In the film, he's more of a generic Australian ranger, Crocodile Dundee light. Here, he's almost like a strange Easter wizard, much prefer. So already we can see, much like North, that he wasn't always the way he was. He had to grow and change to become who he is in the films. And then we learn he's not a rabbit at all, but a puka. Am I saying that right? Puka? Anyway, it's a race of creatures that, according to legend, oversee the health and well-being of various planets in the universe. We learn that the dude is a borderline genius, and he manipulates things from the shadows and invented chocolate, a substance that he managed to trick Omric, a powerful wizard, into taking the credit for inventing, so that he could stay anonymous. And we also learn that he is very rigid in his thoughts and beliefs. For instance, when Omric goes back in time to try and stop Pitch from ever turning evil, and thus stopping the interstellar genocide, Bunny stops him. He refuses to let him change things, despite the fact that it would save a lot of people's lives. But for a big portion of his book, he remains a mystery. You don't see him, you just hear about him from other characters, or catch glimpses here and there, like I said. And so, eventually, after Pitch returns yet again, our heroes go in search of Bunny, so that he can lead them to the Earth's core, where Pitch is holding various members of the Santa Clausen village hostage. And when we do finally meet him properly, he's weird. He's eccentric, he's odd, he goes off on weird tangents like describing how the Earth was initially shaped like an egg, but to save it from twirling into the sun one day he made it round, or that he literally built Australia from the excess dirt from said planet reshaping. And instead of being loud and aggressive and in your face and very Australian, he's distant and dismissive. He's basically a bunny Willy Wonka. He doesn't much care about humans anymore, and he reveals that his people were massacred by Pitch Black during the fall of the Golden Age. Pretty dark backstory. I'm here for it. And I mean, there is more to the story, but I think this was just the most relevant part of it. That in the prequel, much like in North's story, he feels like a completely different character. But there are still traces of what you see in the films. He's just different. Although, in my mind, this version also feels like a bit of a soft reboot of the character to make him more in line with the author's original vision, but regardless. We could have had Easter Bunny Gandalf one day. I mean, maybe we still could if we ever get some sort of reboot, but the fact remains that here is yet another example of how much more this franchise has to offer if it's only given the chance. But anyway though, these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think about the Easter Bunny's backstory? Do you think it could have made for a good Netflix show? Or do you think it's maybe a little bit too different for your tastes? Is this yet another case of how much more this franchise had to offer? Do you think a show based on this premise would do well? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.